Something out there has been counting every ship that ever crossed into human space, and not one of them ever came back. For generations, the great empires of the galaxy pushed outward, swallowing star after star, folding species after species into their banners. Then the maps simply stopped. There was a line drawn through the void where every chart went blank, and every captain felt a cold warning settle into their bones. No empire dared cross that line. No scholar dared explain why. The fear was older than memory, and somehow that made it worse. The Velmori people, ancient and proud, had once charted more of the galaxy than any other civilization in recorded history. Their explorers had walked on 1,000 dead worlds and tamed 100 living ones. But when their finest vessels reached the edge of human territory, those vessels simply went quiet. No wreckage, no final transmission, no drifting hull to recover, just an absence where a ship used to be. The conquered assembly, a fragile union of the galaxy's most dominant species, had argued about the human question for over a century. Humanity was strange even by the standards of strange. Other civilizations rose slowly through patience and treaty and careful diplomacy. Humans rose through fire. They clawed upward through war and ruin and stubborn refusal to die until somehow they stood among the stars. And then, without warning, they stopped reaching. Their fleets withdrew behind an invisible border. No further conquest, no further colonies, no explanation offered to anyone. They had drawn a line in the dark and dared no one to cross it. Yet someone always asks the question that everyone else is too afraid to speak aloud. Envoy Darrow Kesson of the Haveth Compact had spent his entire career studying humanity from a careful and respectful distance. He found them endlessly puzzling, fragile in body yet impossible to break in will. He had read every report the Compact possessed. He had listened to old soldiers speak of Earth in hushed, frightened tones, and now finally an invitation had come. A human delegation offered passage for a single envoy to visit one of their core worlds. It was the first invitation extended in over 100 years. Darrow understood the danger. Every record agreed that nothing which crossed that boundary ever returned. Still, the question burned inside him like a coal he could not set down. He accepted the invitation anyway. The moment his ship slipped past the boundary, his crew fell silent without being told to. The stars beyond seemed dimmer somehow, as though the light itself had grown reluctant to travel that far. His instrument stuttered, registering readings that made no logical sense. Then a voice arrived, calm and measured. "Welcome to our territory, Envoy Kesson. We hope your visit is comfortable." The voice was too composed, too gentle for the weight pressing down on Darrow's chest. He had built his whole life on the belief that the universe obeyed knowable rules. But some quiet animal part of him understood already that humanity had found something out here that no other species had ever found, and they had made absolutely certain no one else would stumble onto it either. A human escort vessel guided Darrow's ship deeper into the unfamiliar dark. It was nothing like the heavy battle cruisers favored by the conquered powers. This craft was lean, understated, yet it moved with a precision that unsettled him to his marrow. Every motion seemed deliberate, as though the vessel itself were thinking. His crew watched the blackness beyond the viewport without speaking a word. Unease had settled over the bridge like dust. Then the human voice returned. "We are approaching Tessar. Prepare for descent." The standard galactic phrasing was flawless yet hollow somehow, as if spoken by something imitating warmth rather than feeling it. Darrow had met human traders before, confident, a little arrogant. This was nothing like that. The view screen flickered, and for the first time in his life, Darrow looked upon the human homeworld. Other species shaped their planets to fit their ambitions. Humanity seemed to live inside a contradiction. Towering structures rose past the cloud layer, while enormous stretches of untouched wilderness sprawled beneath them undisturbed. The world felt alive in a way he could not name. Something ancient stirred beneath its surface. As the ship dropped into the atmosphere, Darrow felt a pressure settle against his mind. Not physical, not explainable. He glanced toward his crew and saw the same dread reflected in their eyes. "Something is wrong," one of them whispered. The vessel touched down on a landing platform and the doors slid open. A small group of humans waited beyond the threshold, their faces carefully unreadable. Unlike most species who adorned themselves in ceremonial finery, these humans wore plain, practical clothing. Their leader, a woman with sharp gray eyes, stepped forward. "Envoy Kessin," she said, "welcome to Earth." Darrow studied her, searching for the smallest crack of deception. He found none. No fear, no pride, only certainty. They knew something the rest of the galaxy was never meant to learn, and he had traveled all this way to find out exactly what that was. Darrow stepped onto the platform, and the planet hit him at once. The air was thick and strange, carrying scents he could not identify, unfamiliar plants, the bite of distant machinery, something else beneath it all that he had no word for. The woman regarded him with eyes that gave nothing away. "I am Director Myra Solène," she said. "You must be weary from the crossing." Her voice carried courtesy without warmth, a statement of fact rather than a welcome. "My crew," Darrow began, but she raised one hand before he finished. "They will be cared for," she said. "But you alone were requested." Darrow stiffened. Every diplomatic custom he knew called for an entourage. Humanity, it seemed, answered to no custom but its own. He turned and gave his officers a slow nod, telling them to comply, though every instinct screamed otherwise. The ship sealed shut behind him, and he stood alone on a world he did not understand. Myra gestured to an unmarked black vehicle, and he climbed inside after only a brief hesitation. The ride passed in total silence. No conversation, no view through the blackened windows. Darrow forced his breathing steady. He had faced warlords and emperors without flinching. Yet beside this quiet woman in this featureless vehicle, he felt something new settle into his chest. Not fear exactly, something closer to dread. When the vehicle finally stopped, the doors opened onto a vast structure buried beneath the surface. The architecture unsettled him in its smoothness. No seams, no ornamentation, nothing but cold, deliberate function. "Follow me," Myra said, and led him through corridor after corridor, each one colder than the last. The walls were lined with massive numbered doors, offering no explanation of what lay behind them. Eventually, they reached one door unlike any other. Thicker, heavier, humming faintly with a power Darrow could feel through the floor beneath his boots. Myra pressed her palm to a panel, and the door slid open onto darkness. Inside stood a single enormous window overlooking something hidden in shadow below. Darrow stepped closer, and the lights rose slowly, revealing what waited beneath. His breath caught. His mind refused to accept the shape before him. It was massive. It was alive. And somehow it already knew he was there. He turned to Myra, his voice barely above a whisper. "What is that?" She met his eyes without blinking. "That," she said, "is why no one crosses into human space." Darrow's twin hearts hammered against his ribs as he stared through the reinforced glass, struggling to make sense of what lay beneath the facility. The chamber stretched far beyond what seemed structurally possible, its depths lit only by faint, cold light embedded along distant walls. At the center of it all, something waited. The creature, if that word even applied, was vast beyond easy comprehension. Its form shifted and folded as though it obeyed no consistent law of matter. One instant it resembled a writhing mass of limbs. The next it suggested something faintly humanoid before dissolving the impression entirely. Worse than its shape was the sense of attention. It had no eyes, yet Darrow felt its awareness settle onto him like oil spreading slowly across still water. Every instinct in his body told him to run. His legs would not obey. "What is that?" he managed to rasp, his throat dry as ash. Myra stood beside him, arms folded, watching his reaction more closely than the entity itself. "This is what we found," she said quietly, "or perhaps more honestly, what found us." Darrow tore his gaze from the glass. "You captured it." "How?" Myra exhaled slowly. "We did not capture it, envoy. We contain it." The word settled into him with crushing weight. Containment implied something too dangerous to release. He had heard of species that imprisoned monstrous things on distant moons, but this was different. This was something humanity had encountered inside their own borders and chosen to seal away rather than destroy. "Where did it come from?" he asked, forcing steadiness into his voice. Myra did not answer at once. She turned back toward the glass, watching the shifting mass respond to their presence. "We do not know," she admitted. "We only know that they exist and that we were never meant to see them." A cold shiver ran through him. "They? How many?" Myra's gray eyes were unflinching. Too many. The silence that followed pressed down on the chamber like a physical weight. Darrow had always believed the universe operated by rules he could eventually learn. Empires rose, wars ended, treaties held. This was something else entirely, something older, something that had never been meant to surface. And this, he whispered, barely able to form the words, is why no one crosses into human space. Myra nodded once. The rest of the galaxy assumes we stopped expanding out of caution, that we simply reached the edge of our ambition. She turned fully toward the glass. The truth is we went too far, we saw too much, and we learned the one lesson no other species in this galaxy has yet understood. Darrow could barely breathe. And what is that? Her voice was almost gentle now, that we were never alone. The weight of those 4 words settled over Darrow like a shroud. His people had always prized their archives, their star charts, their careful records of 1,000 encountered species. Yet in all their long history, nothing had prepared them for this. "You should leave," Myra said softly. His gaze snapped toward her. "What?" She turned to face him fully, her expression unreadable. "We granted this meeting because we knew someone eventually would ask. We knew curiosity would outweigh caution in one of you." A cold knot formed in his stomach. "You are warning me." She gave the smallest nod. "We do not block others from entering our space out of secrecy or pride," she said. "We do it because we are holding something back. And if the rest of the galaxy begins prodding at the edges, we cannot promise the containment will hold." The meaning of her words sank into him like ice through water. Humanity was not hoarding treasure. They were standing at the edge of something terrible, holding a line that should never be tested. Darrow wanted to argue, to demand the full truth on behalf of every species that deserved to know, but deep in his chest he understood. Some truths were better left buried. Some doors were never meant to open. "Take me back to my ship," he said finally. Myra nodded without argument and without further discussion. As they walked away from the observation chamber, Darrow forced himself not to glance back at the impossible shifting mass below. But just before the heavy door sealed shut behind them, he heard it. A whisper meant for no living ear. "We see you." He did not speak again for the rest of the journey because, for the first time in his long career, he understood what true fear actually felt like. The ride back to the landing platform felt suffocating. Darrow sat in silence, his mind replaying the whisper over and over, though it had no source and no mouth. He had negotiated with the most cunning minds in the galaxy, yet nothing had prepared him for this. Across from him, Myra sat, composed, arms folded, gaze fixed forward. "You have known about them a long time," he finally said, his voice quieter than intended. "Longer than you would believe," she answered. "And you have kept this from the rest of the galaxy." A faint, humorless smile crossed her lips. "Would you have done differently?" He wanted to insist, yes, that every species deserved the truth. The words died before reaching his tongue because he understood she was right. This was not a war that fleets and weapons could resolve. "How many have seen it?" he asked. "Few," she said. "Fewer still leave with their minds intact." A chill crept down his spine. "You will return to your people," she continued. "You will tell them humanity will not open its borders. We will not negotiate this, and if they push further." For the first time he saw something behind her eyes that was not fear but resolve. "If they push further, we will not stop them, but we will not be responsible for what follows." A long silence stretched between them. If he told the assembly everything, they would demand proof. Proof would mean scouts. Scouts would mean warships, and none of them would be prepared for what waited beyond that border. The vehicle finally stopped at the landing platform, where his crew waited anxiously beside the ramp. He turned to Myra one last time. "You are not telling me everything." "No," she admitted. "I am not." He considered pressing further but chose silence instead. Some knowledge was never meant to be claimed. Without another word, he walked toward his ship, his crew falling in step behind him, sensing the weight pressing on his shoulders. The doors sealed and he moved straight to the command deck. "Prepare for immediate departure," he ordered. The engines roared to life, and as Earth shrank behind them in the viewport, Darrow understood at last what that world truly was. Not an empire reaching outward. A thin, fragile wall holding something terrible at bay. For the first time in his life, He prayed that wall would hold because if it failed, nothing else would matter. As his ship broke free of Earth's gravity, Darrow stood at the viewport watching the blue world fade into darkness. His heart still hammered. His mind replayed every detail of the chamber below the facility. Behind him, his crew remained silent, sensing the stiffness in his posture. The planet should have looked like any other inhabited world. Instead, it looked like a prison, and he was the one who had been allowed to glimpse inside its walls. Envoy. The voice of his second officer, Commander Tamzik Rowe, cut through his thoughts. Are we clear to depart? Darrow forced steadiness into his voice. Set course for the assembly station. No delays. Tamzik hesitated. No delays. Are we not filing a report with the humans before we leave? No, Darrow said quickly. We leave now. Tamzik gave a slow nod and turned to relay the order. The crew, though clearly confused, complied without question. The hum of the engines deepened as the ship prepared for faster-than-light travel. Darrow gripped the armrests of his chair tighter than necessary, his mind replaying Myra's final words. We will not stop them, but we will not be responsible for what follows. It had not been a warning. It had been a promise. The ship surged forward, stars streaking past the viewport, yet no matter how far they traveled, Darrow could not shake the feeling of being watched. The return journey to the assembly station passed without incident, yet Darrow found no comfort in that fact. Every quiet stretch of space felt heavier than before. He spent long hours rewriting his report, deciding exactly how much truth to offer and how much to withhold. When the station finally came into view, it looked smaller than he remembered. A massive structure floating at the edge of neutral space, built from the architecture of a dozen different civilizations. A place built for careful words and calculated alliances. As his ship docked, Darrow straightened his uniform and drew a slow breath. One wrong sentence could send the assembly chasing answers that would destroy them all. The airlock opened to a waiting escort of officials. Word of his meeting with humanity had already spread. A formal hearing had been scheduled within the hour. He had no further time to prepare. As he walked through the gleaming halls toward the assembly chamber, he kept his expression carefully blank, his words already forming in his mind. When the great doors opened, dozens of representatives turned to face him, awaiting his report. He stepped to the center of the chamber and stood tall despite the weight pressing on his shoulders. Negotiations with humanity have concluded, he began, his voice steady. Their position remains unchanged. They will not expand their borders. They will not open them to outsiders, and they will not explain the reasons behind their isolation. A ripple of murmurs spread through the chamber. He could already sense the more aggressive factions bristling, demanding further pressure. He drew a slow breath. This was the moment that would decide everything. Speak the full truth and risk catastrophe, or offer half-truths and pray the galaxy never learned what waited beyond that border. Humanity has chosen its path, he said finally, his voice calm and measured. And I strongly advise this council to respect it. Silence followed. Then the chamber erupted into a storm of voices, some in agreement, others in protest. Questions flew at him from every direction, yet he stood firm, his face unreadable, because he understood one truth absolutely. Some secrets were never meant to be uncovered, and some warnings deserved to be heeded, even when they came from the most unsettling species in the galaxy. The chamber remained in chaos, voices rising from a dozen different species at once. Darrow stood still, letting the noise wash past him. He had expected exactly this reaction. The assembly had spent centuries expanding, cataloging, claiming every corner of known space. The notion that a younger species could simply forbid them from exploring further struck many as an unforgivable insult. A voice cut sharply through the noise. Envoy Kessin. He turned toward the speaker. High Marshal Ostrin Kal of the Drenok Imperium rose from his seat, a towering figure of scaled green skin and golden predator eyes. Unlike the others, his voice carried no frustration, only cold calculation. You expect us to simply accept this answer? He asked, his gaze fixed on Darrow like a predator studying prey. To respect their refusal without question. Darrow kept his expression neutral. Yes. A wave of dissatisfaction rippled through the chamber. Ostrin's mouth curled into something resembling amusement. And why exactly should we do that? He leaned forward. You ask this council to abandon an entire region of space because the humans simply told us to. Do you understand how that sounds? Darrow's fingers twitched at his sides. It is not weakness, he said carefully. It is wisdom. Ostrin's eyes narrowed. Then share this wisdom with the rest of us. The chamber fell quiet, every eye turning to Darrow. His heart pounded against his ribs. He had expected this challenge, yet still had no perfect answer prepared. Tell them everything and they would demand proof. Proof would mean expeditions. Expeditions would mean ships crossing the boundary. And then the thing that had whispered to him in the dark would know they were coming. He forced his breathing steady. Humanity has remained within its borders for centuries, he said. They do not seek conquest. They do not interfere in the affairs of others. If they wanted war, they would have already waged it. If they wanted allies, they would have already sought them. Instead, they remain sealed within their own space, not because of us, but because of something they refuse to name. He let his words settle before continuing. And if a species as relentless as humanity chooses to halt its own expansion, perhaps we should ask why before demanding they move aside. Ostrin's golden eyes gleamed. Or perhaps, he countered, they have found something valuable within their borders and intend to keep it for themselves. Darrow's jaw tightened. This was dangerous territory. The Drenok Imperium thrived on ambition. They saw obstacles as invitations rather than warnings. If Ostrin believed humanity guarded something worth claiming, he would push for direct intervention regardless of consequence. The humans issued no threats, Darrow said evenly. They postured at nothing. They attempted no deception. They made only one thing clear. He looked directly at Ostrin. If we enter their space, they will not protect us. They will not answer for whatever happens to those who ignore their warning. A murmur of unease spread through the room. Several representatives exchanged uncertain glances, yet Ostrin remained unmoved. And you believe them? Darrow met his gaze without flinching. Yes. Ostrin studied him for a long, silent moment before settling back into his seat with a slight scoff. Your caution is noted, envoy. But Darrow understood this was far from finished. Too many voices in that chamber saw mystery as invitation rather than warning. They would send ships. They would try to chart what lay beyond the human border, and when they did, something would look back at them. He clenched his hands beneath the table, dread settling deep into his bones, and prayed that when the truth finally landed, it would not already be too late. The council session dragged on for hours, filled with argument, counterargument, and endless procedural posturing. Some representatives insisted humanity's secrecy, demanded investigation. Others urged patience and restraint. But Darrow knew the truth about this institution. Patience was never its strength. By the time the session ended, nothing had been formally decided, yet he saw it plainly in their eyes. The machinery of ambition was already turning, and the Drenok Imperium in particular would not let this mystery rest. As Darrow left the chamber, Commander Tamzik fell into step beside him. They are going to send ships, Darrow said quietly. I know. They will not heed the warning. I know. They walked in silence for a while, their footsteps echoing through the grand corridors. Beyond the great windows, the endless dark stretched on, filled with the lights of arriving and departing vessels. Darrow wondered how many of them would ever return once they crossed the wrong border. Tamzik hesitated before speaking again. What exactly did you see on Earth? Darrow stopped walking, his mind flashing back to that underground chamber, the whisper, the suffocating presence, the way reality itself seemed to bend around whatever the humans kept hidden below. He turned to his officer, his expression grim. I saw something I do not understand, he said, and I do not wish to understand it. For the first time, Tamzik looked genuinely uneasy. That bad? Worse, Darrow said simply. They continued walking, though his officer's unease was now plain to see. Good, he thought to himself. A little fear was safer than reckless curiosity. When they reached their ship, Darrow wasted no time preparing for departure, eager to leave the station behind. He had delivered his warning. The rest now rested beyond his control, or so he believed. 3 weeks later, the distress call arrived. Darrow was in his quarters when the alert flashed across his screen. His heart pounded as he read the report. A Sovereign Legion scouting vessel had vanished somewhere within human space. More reports followed in rapid succession. Every ship sent to investigate also disappeared. No wreckage, no distress beacon, no survivors, only silence. The assembly fell into chaos. The Sovereign Legion demanded answers. Humanity offered none beyond a single repeated message. Do not come here. Do not send more ships. We will not help you. A deep chill settled into Darrow's bones. This was it. The exact outcome he had feared. Someone had ignored the warning and now something had woken. The assembly convened an emergency session. Tensions ran high as representatives split into furious factions. Some demanded retaliation against humanity for its silence. Others urged extreme caution, fearing a threat none of them understood. High Marshal Ostrin was livid. "We have lost our people," he roared, slamming a clawed fist against the table, "and humanity refuses to answer for it." Darrow sat quietly, listening, his mind racing through the pieces of a terrible picture forming in his thoughts. He knew with certainty that humanity was not responsible for the missing ships. Something else had taken them. He recalled Myra's final words with a sinking dread. "We will not stop them, but we will not be responsible for what follows." This was precisely what she had meant. He rose to his feet. "Marshal," he said, addressing Ostrin directly, "you believe humanity withholds information. That may be true, but consider this. What if this was never their doing at all?" Ostrin's eyes burned. Then who else could possibly be responsible? Darrow chose his next words with great care. "You assume we are the only ones looking out there." He let the weight of the implication settle across the room. What if something out there was looking back? An uneasy silence swept the chamber. The thought was too terrible for most to entertain. Ostrin sneered. "If there is a true threat, we must uncover it. We cannot allow humanity to dictate the boundaries of our own knowledge." Darrow clenched his fists, knowing this exact mindset would doom them all. Before he could argue further, the emergency alarms blared. A new transmission had arrived from the missing Sovereign vessel, and what it carried was worse than anything he could have imagined. The chamber fell into stunned silence as the transmission played across the central display. The image was grainy and flickering, yet the voice carried through unmistakably Sovereign. "This is Scout Vessel Hollow Vanta. We are lost." The voice trembled with a fear Darrow had never heard from that warrior people before. They built their entire culture on strength and dominance. Yet this was pure terror. "They are here," the voice continued, barely a whisper now. "Not human, not human. They are watching. We were wrong. We were." A sudden burst of static swallowed the voice. Then something else came through. Not a scream, not a plea. A low, distorted whisper layered over itself 1,000 times, as though a chorus of unseen mouths spoke in perfect unison. It belonged to no known language. It was something older, something primal, and every soul in that chamber felt it pressing against their chest. Some clutched at their hearts as though the sound itself carried weight. Others simply shuddered as cold dread crawled down their spines. Then abruptly silence. The transmission ended. No one in the chamber moved until Ostrin finally rose. Where did that signal originate? His voice was sharp yet strained beneath the surface. A technician hesitated before answering. It came from the far edge of human space. Ostrin's jaw clenched tight. "Then we sent a fleet." Darrow's stomach dropped. "You cannot be serious." Ostrin turned on him, eyes blazing. "We have lost ships. We have lost people. You expect us to sit idle while that thing in the transmission—" "It was not Sovereign," Darrow interrupted. "It was not human, it was something else entirely." Ostrin scoffed. "And what would you have us do? Abandon our missing to whatever horror waits out there?" Darrow's mind raced for any alternative. "Send a diplomatic envoy, speak with the humans again. They know exactly what waits out there. If we push into that space without understanding what we face—" Ostrin slammed his fist down again. "Understanding is for cowards. Action is what this moment demands." Darrow's voice dropped low. "If you send fleets into human space, you will not only be facing the humans, you will be facing whatever it is they are hiding from." For one brief moment, Ostrin hesitated, not from doubt, but from the raw fear gripping the entire room. The transmission had shaken something ancient loose in all of them. But warriors like Ostrin did not bow to fear. They fought against it instead. And Darrow understood with grim certainty that no argument would stop him now. Ostrin turned away. "We mobilize a fleet." The fleet reached the edge of human space 2 standard weeks later. Darrow had not been invited to accompany it nor consulted on the decision. He had received only a brief cold message from Ostrin, "Stay out of the way." So he remained behind aboard his own vessel, stationed at a careful distance, watching and waiting. At first nothing happened. The Dreadnought fleet conducted long-range scans and found nothing at all. No wreckage. No human defenses mobilizing. Only empty space. Then the whispers began. Not through any communication channel, inside the minds of the crews themselves. It started as a faint itch at the edge of thought, a quiet presence, a feeling of being watched. The whispers grew steadily louder. One by one, crew members reported hearing something just beyond comprehension. And then the shadows arrived. They were not ships. They were not life forms in any sense the Dreadnought understood. They simply waited and watched. One vessel opened fire, and that was when the screaming began. It did not come through the comms. It came from the ships themselves. Metal twisted and hulls folded inward as though unseen hands crushed them from within. Some vessels tried to flee only to vanish mid-flight without leaving a single trace behind. The flagship attempted one final distress transmission. Its last words to the assembly were simply, "We were wrong." Then silence. The entire fleet was gone. Not destroyed in any conventional sense. Simply erased as though it had never existed at all. 3 days later, Darrow sat alone in his quarters, staring blankly into the void beyond his viewport. He had known this outcome was coming, yet even he had not anticipated its sheer unfathomable finality. The Dreadnought Imperium descended into chaos. The assembly itself was shaken to its foundation. Even Ostrin, the proud, unshakable warrior, had vanished, lost to whatever force had claimed his entire fleet. Humanity offered no reaction at all. No threats. No warnings. No comment whatsoever, as though this outcome had always been inevitable, as though it had happened many times before. A private message appeared on Darrow's screen, sent from an anonymous source. "We told you not to look." He closed his eyes slowly. Somewhere out in that endless dark, something was now fully awake, and it knew exactly who had looked. The message sat on Darrow's screen, its meaning sinking into his thoughts like a stone dropped into a black ocean. "We told you not to look." Not a threat, not even a warning, simply a statement of fact. His hands curled into fists. The Dreadnought fleet was gone, not crippled, not defeated in battle, simply erased as though it had never existed. And humanity did not celebrate, did not retaliate. They only watched unmoved, as though they had witnessed this exact tragedy play out many times before. Darrow exhaled slowly. He had one choice left. One final chance to do what no one else in this entire galaxy had the wisdom to attempt. He had to speak with the humans again. The journey back to Earth passed without a single incident. No ships intercepted him. No warnings echoed through his comms. And that absence unsettled him more than any challenge could have. They knew he was coming, and they were not stopping him. That meant only one of two things. Either they no longer saw him as any kind of threat, or they no longer saw anyone as a threat at all. Earth's surface looked just as unassuming as before. Bright oceans, vast green continents, cities rising into the clouds built from technology far behind what other civilizations had achieved. And yet here humanity stood untouched, unchallenged, unafraid. Myra waited for him on a quiet observation deck overlooking a sprawling city, her hands folded behind her back, a faint, knowing smile on her face. "I was wondering when you would return," she said. Darrow stopped a few paces away. "You knew this would happen. We warned you," she answered simply. His hands twitched at his sides. "You let them die." Her smile faded instantly. "No," she said, turning to face him fully. "We let them make their own choice." Frustration boiled in his chest. "Then tell me, what is that thing? What did they wake?" Myra studied him for a long moment, as though weighing exactly how much truth he could bear. Then she sighed quietly. "It is not a thing, Darrow." He felt something cold crawl across his skin at her words. "It is not a species, not a force, not even something close to a god." She looked back out over the glowing city. "It is the space between things." His pulse pounded loudly in his ears. "I do not understand." "You do not need to," she said, her voice growing distant and quiet. "We learned long ago that some questions should never be asked and some doors should never be opened. But every species that rises, that builds, that hungers for more makes the exact same mistake. They believe the void is empty." She turned back to him, her expression unreadable. But the void is not empty, Darrow. It is only silent until someone makes the wrong kind of noise. His breath caught painfully in his throat. The Drenok fleet had not simply been destroyed. They had been heard. And whatever heard them had reached back. That does not make sense, he managed. How could you possibly know all of this? Myra offered a tired, sorrowful smile. Because we were the first ones to look. The realization struck him like a physical blow. Humanity had made this same terrible mistake long before any of them, and somehow they had survived it. He stepped back, his thoughts spinning. You are containing it, as much as we possibly can. For how long? She exhaled slowly. For as long as we manage not to repeat the mistakes of everyone else. Darrow looked past her toward the vast living planet stretching beneath them. A species that had chosen to stop expanding. That had chosen to stop reaching too far. That understood better than anyone never to provoke the unknown. And finally, he understood exactly why the galactic charts ended at the edge of human space. Not because humanity posed any threat, but because humanity alone understood where the true danger truly lived, and the rest of the galaxy had simply been too arrogant to listen. He turned, his stomach twisting with unease. What happens now? Her voice remained steady. That depends entirely. On what? She met his eyes, and for the first time he saw something ancient and haunted flicker behind them. On whether or not the rest of the galaxy can finally learn to stay quiet. Darrow left Earth that day carrying more questions than he had arrived with, yet one truth had become unshakable. There was no war left to fight here. No enemy left to defeat. Only an endless watching silence stretching across the dark. And the certain knowledge that somewhere out in that void something vast was still listening for the next sound that should never be made. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, then you already know exactly what to do next. Hit that like button right now before you forget, because it genuinely helps this channel grow and reach more storytellers like you. And if you want more tales like this one, stories that crawl under your skin and stay there long after the screen goes dark, then subscribe to this channel today. Subscribe so you never miss a single future story the moment it drops. Stay close, stay curious, and remember the void is always listening.